The assignment came through on a Tuesday, which was the same day my contract with the Compact Athletic Training Division was due for renewal. My supervisor, a compact woman named Orvith who had a gift for burying bad news in otherwise routine paperwork, slid the file across her desk without making eye contact. "Selthorne Palace," she said, "Training Annex 6 weeks." I looked at the file. The name at the top was Princess Very Selthorne, third daughter of King Orvath of the Selthorne Royal House. Below the name, in the category field where they usually listed the training objective, sprint work, endurance conditioning, unarmed discipline, whatever the client needed, someone had typed a single word. Remedial. I set the file back down. Define remedial. Orvith finally looked at me. "The princess has failed the Selthorne court's formal physical assessment 3 times. The king wants her to pass the 4th. You have 6 weeks. What did she fail on?" "Everything." Orvith picked up her stylus and went back to whatever she had been working on before I came in. "The court assessment covers 8 disciplines. She has not passed a single one." I knew the Selthorne assessment. I had worked with 2 Selthorne court members the previous year, a junior diplomat and his attaché, and both had described it as demanding but achievable for any healthy adult in the species. Not elite, not designed to eliminate candidates. Designed to confirm that a member of the royal house could function in the physical demands of court life, ceremonial combat postures, extended standing, the formal movement sequences that Selthorne culture had built into its diplomatic and governance rituals. Failing everything 3 times over meant one of 2 things. Either the princess was in significantly worse physical condition than the court wanted to acknowledge, or something else was going on that the court had either missed or chosen not to examine. Is there a medical file? There is a medical record indicating no significant health conditions. Who conducted the assessment? Selthorne Palace physicians. I thought about that. I thought about the word remedial, typed into a category field by someone who had never met the princess and probably never would. I thought about the fact that the king had retained an outside contractor rather than reassigning her to an internal court trainer, which told me either that every internal trainer had already tried and given up, or that the king wanted the failure on someone else's record when it happened again. What happens if she fails the 4th assessment? Orvith's stylus stopped moving. She is removed from the succession line. I picked up the file. When do I leave? The Selthorne Palace Training Annex was a series of connected halls on the palace's eastern side, built low to the ground and faced in the same pale stone as the residential wing. From the outside, it had the look of something functional and slightly apologetic, not the grand public architecture of the throne complex, but not a servant's outbuilding either. An in-between space, which was fitting. I had been assigned to an in-between situation. A court administrator named Vethais met me at the annex entrance. He was precise, formal, and kept his gaze about 6 inches to my left throughout our conversation, which in Selthorne custom indicated that he considered this a minor enough assignment that it did not merit direct engagement. He showed me the lower practice hall, 40 feet of smooth training floor, mirrored on one long wall, equipment stored along the other, the corridor that connected it to the upper observation terrace, and the small room at the annex's northern end that contained the medical observation files. "The princess will arrive at the 6th hour tomorrow," he said. "She has been informed of the arrangement." "Has she been told what the arrangement is for?" A pause. "She has been told she has been assigned a trainer." "Has she been told why?" Another pause, slightly longer. The details were considered the trainer's responsibility to communicate. So she did not know she had failed 3 assessments. Or, more likely, she knew, but no one had sat down with her and said the words clearly. I had encountered this before, in court settings across 6 different species. The assumption that the person at the center of the situation was the last one who needed to be spoken to plainly. "I will need unrestricted access to the medical observation room," I said. Vethise's eyes moved to my left shoulder. "The files there are routine. As I said, no significant health conditions. I will need unrestricted access nonetheless." He gave it to me because the contract specified it and he did not have grounds to refuse. After he left, I went to the medical observation room and spent 2 hours reading. The files were thin. The palace physicians had documented the 3 assessment failures in the same flat, administrative language they used for everything else: failed unarmed discipline assessment, failed endurance sequence, failed formal movement protocol, without ever going further than the outcome. No notation of why she had failed. No record of whether they had observed anything in her movement during the assessments that might explain it. No follow-up examination. The record of the assessments read like a report on a piece of faulty equipment that had been tested, found deficient, and sent back with a notation of deficiency and nothing else. There was one file that was different. A developmental assessment from roughly 8 years prior, conducted by a physician whose name I did not recognize. The language was more specific. It noted a variance in Vary's nerve cluster architecture along the left shoulder girdle and upper spine. A variation described as within the range of naturally occurring developmental differences in the Selthorn species, present in approximately 3% of the population, and typically self-resolving by adulthood. Typically. I read the word twice. Then I read the rest of the file. The physician had made no treatment recommendations, had noted the variance, categorized it as non-significant, and closed the file. There was no follow-up notation, no record of anyone having checked whether the self-resolution had actually occurred. I sat in the medical observation room for a while after I finished reading and looked at the wall. 3% of the population. A variance that was supposed to resolve on its own, and a princess who had, for reasons the palace physicians had never looked at carefully enough to find, failed every physical assessment she had ever been given. I thought about the word remedial again. In the morning, at the 6th hour, I was in the lower practice hall when Princess Vary Selthorn arrived. She was younger than I had expected, 22 by the Selthorn calendar, which put her at roughly 20 in human terms. Pale ash-gray skin, characteristic of the Selthorn species at her age tier. Dark copper-red hair pinned close to her head with 2 plain clasps. Eyes that were a deep amber gold, currently fixed somewhere between the training floor and the middle distance, with the particular focus of someone who is working very hard to look like they are not bracing for something. She was bracing for something. I had seen that posture before, on athletes who had been told they were failing. It was not a posture of weakness. It was the posture of a person who has been asked to perform something that causes them pain, who has been told the pain is not real, and who has arrived to do it again because they do not know how else to respond. I did not ask her to perform anything. "My name is Cadden Marsh," I said. "I was brought in from the compact training division. Before we do anything else, I want to watch you move." She looked at me directly for the first time. "Watch me move. Walk to the far wall and back, normal pace, don't adjust for me." A small hesitation, a calculation behind her eyes, the kind that asked whether this was a trick. Then she walked. I watched her. I watched the way her left arm swung slightly less freely than her right. I watched the almost imperceptible lean away from the left side when she turned at the far wall, the brief reorganization of her weight that happened before she committed to any movement that would put torque on her left shoulder. I watched the flatness of her face, not boredom, not disengagement, but the managed expression of a person who has learned to not show what they feel when they move, because what they feel when they move is pain. She walked back to where I was standing and stopped. "Again," I said, "same pace, but raise your left arm to shoulder height as you walk." The flatness cracked for just a second. It was not much, a tightening at the corner of her mouth, a fractional change in her breathing, and she controlled it immediately. But I had been watching for it. She raised her left arm, she walked. The arm stayed at shoulder height for about 4 steps, and then on the 5th step, when the natural rhythm of walking would have required a slight rotation of the left shoulder girdle, her pace changed. Just slightly. A half step of compensation, so practiced it was nearly invisible. "You can put your arm down." She did. "How long have you had pain along your left shoulder and upper spine?" The amber gold eyes came to mine. Something shifted in them, not quite relief, and not quite suspicion, but the expression of someone who has heard a question they were not expecting and does not yet know if it is safe to answer. "Since I was a child," she said. "Has anyone examined it?" "A physician outside the palace." The palace physician said it was not significant. "Has anyone examined it recently?" "No." I nodded. "All right," I said. "Here is what is going to happen. We are not going to work on any of the assessment disciplines today. I want to spend this session doing a full movement evaluation. I'm going to ask you to do a series of things, none of them difficult, and I'm going to watch carefully. Some of them may cause discomfort. When they do, I want you to tell me because that information is part of the evaluation, not as a complaint, as data." She was looking at me the way people look at someone who has said something that does not match their expectations of the situation. The other trainers did not conduct evaluations. What did they do? They began with the assessment disciplines. A pause. They said the best way to prepare for the assessment was to practice the assessment. I thought about the physician's file. I thought about the word remedial. I thought about the 3 attempts, the 8 disciplines. The outcome notated the same flat way each time. They were working from an incorrect premise, I said. The assessment isn't the problem. Sit down, please. I'm going to start with your range of motion. We worked for 2 hours. I did not push her. I moved her through ranges of motion at her left shoulder and upper spine, asked her to indicate where discomfort began and where it sharpened, noted the specific points and their correspondence to the developmental file I had read the evening before. She answered every question with a precision that told me she had been observing her own condition carefully for years without ever having anyone ask her to describe it. The nerve cluster variants had not resolved. The developmental assessment from 8 years prior had described it as expected to self-resolve, and it had not, and no one had ever gone back to check. The result was a chronic hypersensitivity along the left shoulder girdle and upper spine that made any movement requiring that structure to bear sustained load or sustained torque genuinely painful. Not incapacitating, not impossible, but painful in a way that the body naturally compensates for, gradually, over years, until the compensation becomes so embedded in the movement pattern that it looks like poor form rather than pain management. To the palace physicians, conducting their routine assessments, it had looked like poor form. To the trainers who had been brought in before me, it had looked like poor effort. To the court, watching their princess fail the same assessments 3 times, it had looked like something else, something that had been quietly given a 1-word category. At the end of the session, I walked her to the annex corridor and told her I would have a modified training plan ready for the following morning. She stopped walking, turned to face me with the careful precision of someone managing a left-side rotation. A modified plan. Based on what I observed today. The assessment is not modified, she said. It was not a challenge. It was a statement of fact, offered quietly by someone who had thought about this more than I had. The 4th assessment will be the same as the previous 3. If I cannot perform the assessment disciplines as they are structured, the modification does not matter. I know. Then what is the plan for? The plan addresses the underlying cause, I said. If we treat the underlying condition, the nerve variants, the compensation patterns your body has built around it, the assessment disciplines become achievable. but we have to work in the correct order. Start with the cause, build from there. She looked at me for a long moment. The amber gold eyes did not give much away, but they were not flat either. There was something in them I recognized as the specific quality of attention that belongs to a person who has been told before that their situation is manageable, who is trying to determine whether this time is different. How long? She asked. 6 weeks. The assessment is in 7. That is not much margin. No, I said, it isn't. I won't pretend it is. Another long moment, then very slightly she nodded. 6th hour tomorrow. I went back to the medical observation room and wrote a full evaluation report. I noted the unresolved nerve cluster variants, mapped the compensation pattern, outlined the treatment and conditioning approach I intended to use. I sent a copy to the court administrator Vethais because the contract required it. I sent a copy to the compact training division for my own records. Then I found the Selthorne Palace's senior physician, a man named Orvath Vel, no relation to the king, and requested 30 minutes of his time. He gave me 25, during which I showed him the developmental assessment from 8 years prior and explained what I had found that morning. He listened. He did not argue. He reviewed the developmental file with the expression of a physician who is recalculating something and does not enjoy the recalculation. At the end of the 25 minutes, he told me he would arrange a proper diagnostic examination within the week. She has been in pain for 8 years, I said before I stood up to leave. He looked at the file. He did not answer. The next 6 weeks were the kind of work I was trained for and rarely got to do cleanly. Most training assignments are about optimizing something that is already functional. This one was about first identifying what was wrong, then correcting it, then building function on top of the correction, in the right order, without skipping steps, without letting the 6-week deadline push us faster than the body could responsibly follow. Very was, I discovered, an exceptionally precise student. She tracked her own progress with the same careful attention she had used to track her own condition, noting what changed, what did not, what felt different after each session. She never overstated improvement, which I appreciated. Some clients, eager for good news, describe progress they have not yet made. She described only what was actually happening, which meant that when she told me something had improved, I could trust it. The diagnostic examination confirmed the nerve variants. The senior physician, to his credit, came back with a treatment recommendation that included both manual therapy and a specific conditioning protocol for the affected structure. I worked with that protocol, modified it for the training context, and built the 6-week plan around it. 3 days a week on the nerve structure work, careful, controlled, not pushing past the point where the body would resist. 3 days on rebuilding her movement patterns, gradually dismantling the 8 years of compensation and replacing it with form that could bear load properly. In the first week, the nerve structure sessions were quiet, methodical things. I would work through specific ranges of motion, applying measured pressure at the points the diagnostic had flagged, and she would tell me, with the flat clinical accuracy of someone reporting weather conditions, exactly where sensation sharpened and where it faded. She had developed over the years an extraordinarily precise map of her own condition. She knew which angles loaded the structure incorrectly. She knew which transitions produced the worst catch. She had learned this the way you learn the geography of a room you live in, by living in it, every day, for a long time. What she had never had was anyone to report it to, who treated the report as relevant information rather than complaint. I treated it as relevant information. It was. Her accuracy in describing what she felt was better than most diagnostic equipment, not because the equipment was imprecise, but because she had been paying attention to this specific thing for 8 years and had a level of interior granularity about it that no scan could replicate. I modified the protocol after the first 3 sessions based on what she told me, and the modifications produced measurably better results in the 4th session than the unmodified version had produced in the third. She noticed the change. "Different pressure point," she said at the end of session 4, not a question. "Yes, based on what you described on Tuesday." She was quiet for a moment. The physicians did not modify their approaches. "In my experience," I said, "the person in the room usually has the most accurate information about what is happening in their own body. It's more efficient to use that information than to ignore it." She looked at me with a quality of attention I was beginning to recognize. The specific look she produced when something said to her did not match the template she had been given for how situations like this one were supposed to proceed. The compensation patterns were the hardest part. They were deeply embedded, reflexive, so automatic that she would execute them without noticing. And once I pointed them out, she had to consciously override them in every session, which is demanding in a way that is different from physical exertion. It requires the kind of sustained attention that tires the mind before it tires the body. The first day I made her aware of the primary compensation, the slight pre-rotation of her left shoulder before any movement that would load it, the body's learned way of buying itself a fraction of a second of position adjustment before the load arrived. She stood very still after I described it, and then said, "I have been doing that since I was 14. I know. I did not know I was doing it. Most people don't. It becomes automatic before you can consciously identify it. Your body learned to manage the pain by preparing for it before it arrived. That's not a failure. It was a reasonable response to a real problem." She processed that. "Then, but now I need to not do it." You need to learn to not do it, which is harder because the reflex is faster than the conscious override. You will catch yourself doing it after you've already done it for a while, before you start catching it early enough to stop it. And then it fades, slowly. It won't disappear entirely on a 6-week timeline, but it will reduce enough that your baseline form improves significantly. She nodded, went back to the drill, caught herself pre-rotating 3 times in the next 10 minutes, stopped each time, corrected, did not complain. She did not complain about any of it. She did not ask me to slow down when it was hard. She also did not pretend it was easier than it was, which meant I could calibrate correctly. Vethais, the court administrator, came to observe a session in the second week. He stood in the doorway of the lower practice hall for approximately 5 minutes, watching me run Very through a controlled range of motion sequence that must have looked, from the doorway, like very little. No sweat, no visible exertion, just a trainer moving a trainee's arm through slow, careful arcs and asking her questions. He left without speaking to either of us. He came back the following week with a second court official, a woman named Cyril, whose function I did not know, but whose expression conveyed that she had opinions about what she was observing. They stood in the doorway for longer this time, perhaps 10 minutes, while Very and I worked through the early stages of the compensation pattern correction, which involved a lot of starting movements, stopping them, identifying the reflex, and beginning again. Cyril said something to Vethais in a low voice as they turned to leave. I did not hear all of it, but I caught the end, barely moving. I had heard variations of that before. Training work that addresses a structural problem looks nothing like training work that is designed to produce visible effort. There is no drama in it. There is repetition, precision, small corrections made and made again. From the outside, particularly to observers whose model of training involves watching athletes work at visible intensity, it can look like very little. From the inside, for the person doing the work, it is the opposite of very little. After Cyril and Vethais were gone, I told Very what I had overheard. I told her because she would find out eventually, and I thought it was better she hear it from me, and with context, than hear it later in some distorted corridor version. She was in the middle of a correction sequence. She finished it before she responded. "They have been observing," she said. "Yes." And reporting to my father, presumably. I would expect so. She was quiet for a moment. What will they report? That the training does not look like what they expected training to look like. I watched her prepare for the next sequence. It will be irrelevant in 5 weeks. Yes, she said, it will. She started the next sequence. The court officials did not come back. In the 3rd week, I asked her, during a session in the annex courtyard where we worked on the load-bearing sequences, when she had first understood that the pain was not going to go away on its own. She was in the middle of a shoulder rotation sequence, controlled, careful, working through a range that had been genuinely impossible in week 1. She completed the rotation before she answered. I understood it before I was told it was not significant, she said. I understood it when I was 12. I stopped telling people because telling people produced the same result each time, a notation in a file and a recommendation to work harder. Did working harder help? It made the compensation patterns more sophisticated. She paused. I became very good at appearing functional. You are functional, I said. You always were. The assessment was measuring the wrong things. She stopped in the middle of the next rotation. It was not the pain that stopped her. The rotation was in her manageable range now. She stopped because of what I had said. The assessment is not measuring the wrong things, she said carefully. The disciplines it measures are real. Court ceremonial movement, extended protocol sequences, unarmed response. These are things a member of the royal house needs to be able to do. I know. I'm not saying the assessment is measuring irrelevant things. I'm saying it was measuring them in a body that had a structural problem that had been misidentified and left untreated, and the results were being interpreted as evidence of personal failure rather than evidence of an untreated condition. She considered that. Those are different things. Yes, I said, they are. She started the rotation again, completed it cleanly. No one has ever said that to me before. I did not answer, because there was nothing useful to say to it. It was true, and it was what it was, and what mattered now was what happened in the next 3 weeks. By the end of week 3, I had enough data to know the trajectory was right. The nerve structure work was producing measurable changes in the range of motion available to the left shoulder girdle, not large changes, but consistent ones, the kind that accumulate in a reliable direction. The compensation patterns were loosening at the edges. In any given session, she would catch the primary pre-rotation reflex earlier than she had in the previous session. I did not tell her this in a way that implied the work was nearly done. It was not nearly done. But I told her what the numbers showed, because she had been operating for most of her life on incomplete and inaccurate information about her own body, and the accurate version was something she was owed. She received the accurate version the way she received everything, with attention and without performance. No relief expressed more strongly than was warranted. No urge to conclude the story before the story was finished. She asked specific questions about what the measurement changes indicated for the timeline, noted the answers, and continued the session. In the 4th week, she told me something that I did not ask for, and that I did not record in any file, because it was not mine to record. We were working in the annex courtyard in the early morning, in the cool before the day's heat arrived. The courtyard was empty except for us. The palace had its rhythms, and the training annex operated largely outside of them. She had just completed a load-bearing sequence cleanly, the first time she had run it without any visible compensation response, and we had both been quiet for a moment afterward. My oldest sister passed the assessment on her first attempt, she said. She was not looking at me. She was looking at the courtyard stone. My second sister passed it on her second. I was told before my first attempt that there was no reason I should not also pass it. I waited. After the first failure, the explanation given was that I had not prepared adequately. After the second, the explanation was that I was not applying sufficient effort, After the third, a pause. After the third, the explanation stopped being about what I had done and became about what I was. The courtyard was quiet. A bird of some selthorn variety moved through the high branches of the ornamental tree near the annex wall. That is a common progression, I said. When the correct explanation isn't found, the failure gets attributed to the person rather than the circumstance. I know that now. She looked up from the stone. The amber gold eyes were steady and without self-pity, which I had come to recognize as characteristic of how she carried difficult things, not suppressed, not performed, simply held. I did not know it at the time. At the time I concluded that the correct explanation was, in fact, the one being offered. It wasn't. No, a pause. That is what I meant when I said you told me the truth. It was not that no one had said encouraging things. People said encouraging things. Try harder, apply yourself. You have the capacity if you commit to it. But no one had said the thing that was simply accurate, which is that there was a specific reason for the specific failures and it was not personal incapacity. She looked back at the courtyard stone. Truth is different from encouragement. Yes, I said, it is. We went back to work. By week 4, the compensation patterns were measurably reduced. Not eliminated. You do not undo 8 years of embedded movement habit in 4 weeks, but reduced enough that her baseline form was clearly different. She had developed the ability to catch the compensation reflex early and override it, which was not the same as not having the reflex, but was the appropriate target at this stage of the work. I began introducing the assessment disciplines in week 4, starting with the ones that placed least load on the left shoulder structure, and working toward the ones that required its full engagement. She approached each one with the same careful attention she brought to everything, observing where the difficulty was, reporting accurately, working through the correction without either catastrophizing or minimizing. In week 5, I introduced the full formal movement sequences. The Selthorne Formal Movement Protocol is a set of 12 connected postures, each one transitioning into the next in a specific sequence, designed to demonstrate controlled physical articulation across the full body. It is not athletic performance. It is closer to a very demanding form of ceremonial movement, requiring sustained precision and the ability to hold each posture while the body bears its own weight in an extended position. For a person with unresolved nerve hypersensitivity along the left shoulder girdle, positions 7 through 10 of the sequence are genuinely punishing because they require the left shoulder structure to bear sustained weight in an extended position with lateral torque applied. These were the positions that had, in all 3 previous assessments, produced the compensation response that the assessors had recorded as incorrect form. Veri and I spent 3 sessions on positions 7 through 10 before I let her attempt the full sequence. The first full sequence attempt was imperfect. She completed it, which she had never done in an assessment context, but there were rough transitions at position 8 and a catch at position 10, where the old compensation reflex surfaced for a second before she overcame it. She stood at the end of the sequence and looked at me. Again, I said. Again, she said. The second attempt was better. The transitions were cleaner. Position 10 was still the hardest. It required a held extension that pushed the left structure to the edge of its current capacity, but she held it. The third attempt was better than the second. I did not tell her it was good enough. It was not yet what it needed to be, but I told her what I was seeing because she had earned that, the honest, accurate account of where she was, not the softened version that assumed she needed protecting from the information. Position 10 is the remaining problem, I said. It's at the edge of what the structure can currently hold with full form. We have 2 weeks. We keep working on the structure conditioning and the sequence. The question is whether 10 resolves on its own as the underlying condition continues to improve, or whether we need to find a different approach to the hold. What would a different approach look like? I would need to watch you try the position from a slightly different preparation angle, not changing the position itself, which is fixed by the protocol, but the way you approach it from position 9. There may be a preparation sequence that sets the left structure in a slightly more favorable starting position for the hold. She thought about it. Show me. I showed her. We spent the rest of the session on the transition from 9 to 10, working through the preparation approach from 4 different angles, watching which one gave the left structure the best mechanical position for the hold that followed. On the 4th approach, she held position 10 for the required count with no catch. That's the one, I said. She came out of the position carefully. Her breathing was controlled. The amber gold eyes were very steady. Will the assessors see the difference in the preparation approach? The preparation approach is not assessed, only the positions themselves. Then it is within the rules. It is within the rules. She nodded once and we moved on. The 6th week arrived. I was not nervous. I've been in enough assessment contexts to know that my nervousness was not the relevant factor. The relevant factor was what Very had built over the previous 5 weeks, and that was not subject to revision by my state of mind on a given morning. I ran through the checklist I always run the week before an assessment: physical condition, injury risk, psychological readiness, any new variables I had not accounted for. The only item that I spent time on was the last one. Very had, over 6 weeks, moved from a person who braced every time she entered a training space to a person who arrived early, and had already begun her pre-session preparation before I reached the lower practice hall. The transformation was not dramatic. She was not a different person, not more openly emotional, not suddenly inclined toward the kind of declarations of gratitude that some clients produce at the end of successful assignments. She was the same careful, precise person she had been on day 1. What had changed was the quality of the steadiness. On day 1, the steadiness was managed, maintained through effort, through the practice suppression of everything that might reveal the cost. By week 6, the steadiness was real. It was the steadiness of someone who had learned what was actually wrong, had addressed it systematically, and had arrived at something close to trust in her own body. That was the change. It was not dramatic. It was the most important thing I had seen in 6 weeks of work. On the last day before the assessment, I ran her through the full protocol sequence twice. Both runs were clean. Position 10 held. The transitions were smooth. She was not at her ceiling. She was working within her capacity, which was exactly where you want to be the day before an assessment. At the end of the 2nd run, she stood in the lower practice hall in the afternoon light that came through the annex windows and looked at the floor for a moment. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," I agreed. "If I fail again." "You will not fail tomorrow." She looked up. "You cannot know that." "I know what I have seen over 6 weeks. I know what you can do now versus what you could do on day 1. I am not guaranteeing the outcome because I cannot control every variable in the room tomorrow. But I am telling you that you are prepared, and I am telling you that what I have observed is consistent with a passing performance." A pause. "You said you would not tell me something easier than the truth." "I am not telling you something easier than the truth. I am telling you the truth, which happens to also be the better outcome." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "No one has told me they believed I could pass." "I know. They have told me to try harder." "I know. It is not the same thing." "No," I said, "it is not." The lower practice hall was very quiet. The afternoon light fell across the training floor in long strips. Outside in the courtyard somewhere, water was moving through the annex's drainage channels with the small persistent sound it always made. "Get some rest tonight," I said. "Eat well. Don't spend time running sequences in your head. Your body knows them now. Trust that." She nodded, started to turn toward the corridor, then stopped. "Cadden." It was the first time she had used my name. "Yes. Thank you." She left before I could answer, which was perhaps the right way for it to happen. The assessment was held in the upper hall of the training annex, which was larger than the lower practice hall and formatted for observation. Tiered seating on the long sides. The assessment floor marked with the formal position indicators in the Selthorn's characteristic deep red. The king was not present for the opening of the assessment, which was standard. He would review the results afterward. 3 court assessors sat behind a low table on the east side of the hall, with the formal documentation of the previous 3 failures visible in the stack of files in front of them. I was not permitted in the hall during the assessment, which was also standard. I waited in the equipment corridor, where I could hear the ambient sounds of the hall without seeing or being seen. The assessment moved through its 8 disciplines in sequence. I could not see very, but I could make certain inferences from the sound, from the timing of the transitions, from the pauses that indicated the assessors marking their files, from the particular quality of silence in the hall that changes when something is going wrong versus when something is simply in progress. The silence held the quality of something in progress. When the formal movement sequence began, identifiable by the rhythm of the preparation, the held beats between positions, I stopped making inferences and simply listened. Position 7. Position 8. The pause at 9 that preceded the 10 transition, the one we had worked on, the preparation approach that set the left structure correctly for what followed. Position 10. Held. The silence in the hall lasted 3 more seconds after I counted the hold. Then I heard the sound of the assessor's pens moving. She had held position 10. The remainder of the assessment took another 40 minutes. I stayed in the corridor. At the end of the 40 minutes, the hall doors opened, and Very walked through them into the corridor. She stopped when she saw me. Her face was controlled. The amber gold eyes were very steady. There was something in them that I had not seen in week 1, or week 2, or even week 5, something that was not quite triumph, because triumph implies surprise, and what she had done today was not a surprise to her. It was something quieter than triumph. It was the expression of a person who has been told, by the event itself, that they were capable of it all along. "The assessors will submit their documentation to the court," she said. "The formal result will be communicated to my father this evening." I heard the sequence. "You held 10. A small pause. "I held 10. We stood in the corridor for a moment. Behind us, through the hall doors, I could hear the assessors gathering their files. Ahead of us, the corridor ran toward the lower practice hall and the annex entrance and the rest of the palace, which was proceeding with its ordinary business as though nothing had changed. Something had changed, not loudly, not in a way that the rest of the palace would register immediately. A woman who had been told, in one form or another, for most of her adult life that her body was deficient had stood in an assessment hall and performed every discipline correctly. That was what had happened. It would take a while for the implications to work through the system, the succession line, the court documentation, the revised understanding of the previous 3 failures, but the fact itself was done. The senior physician sent a revised medical notation to the court 2 weeks ago, I said, documenting the nerve variants and the treatment protocol. It's part of the formal record now. She looked at me. I did not know that. I thought it mattered that the record was accurate. A pause. "It does." Another pause. "I did not think anyone would." She stopped, restarted. "It matters that someone thought to do that." The hall doors behind her opened, and one of the assessors leaned through to tell her that they would need her signature on the formal documentation. She went back through the doors. I walked to the lower practice hall and sat down on the equipment bench along the wall and let out a breath I had been holding since the formal movement sequence began. The door of the lower practice hall opened 20 minutes later and she came back through it. The assessors were gone. The upper hall was empty. The annex had returned to its ordinary quiet. She crossed the training floor and sat down on the bench beside me, which was not something she had done before in 6 weeks. We had always maintained the appropriate professional geometry, trainer and trainee, instructor and student. The bench put us at the same level, side by side, with the empty training floor in front of us. "The formal result is a pass," she said. "I know." They noted it as a significant improvement from the previous assessments. A slight pause. They did not appear to have an explanation for the previous failures. "The revised medical notation in the file explains it. They may not have read it yet." She was quiet for a moment. The afternoon light had moved since the earlier session, later now, coming through the annex windows at a lower angle, laying longer strips of gold across the training floor. "I have been told that I am useless at things for most of my life," she said. It was said with the same precision she brought to everything, the same flat, accurate reporting. Not always in that word, but in that meaning. "I know." I believed it in part. A pause. It is difficult not to believe something when the evidence keeps confirming it. When you fail the same assessment 3 times, when every trainer who is brought in eventually stops being brought in, when the physicians record nothing significant and everyone proceeds as though the problem is simply your failure to try adequately, it is difficult to maintain certainty that the problem is not, in fact, you. I did not say anything. "What you said in the 3rd week," she continued, "that the assessment was measuring the wrong things. That the results were evidence of an untreated condition rather than personal failure. I have been thinking about that since the 3rd week." It was the truth. "Yes." She turned her head slightly and looked at me, not the flat, controlled look of the first days, but something more direct, more present. "It was the truth, and no one had said it before. And that is the thing I have been thinking about. Not the training, not the assessment, not the position 10 sequence. The fact that someone looked at the situation and saw what it actually was rather than what was easiest to label it." The lower practice hall was very quiet. The drainage water moved in the courtyard outside. "That was the work," I said. "That is always the work if you do it correctly. You look at what is actually there." She was quiet again. "Then you leave tomorrow." "My contract is for 6 weeks. Will you? Is there a mechanism by which a contractor is retained past the initial term?" I looked at the training floor. The question was asked with the same precise composure as everything else she said, which meant it was more likely a genuine practical inquiry than anything more, and the appropriate response was to treat it as one. There are standard extension provisions in compact contracts. They require a request from the client. "Then I will make a request." I looked at her. The amber gold eyes were steady and direct. She was not performing composure now. This was simply what composure looked like when it had a real foundation under it. "I passed the assessment," she said, "but the structural condition is still being treated. The senior physician has outlined a treatment protocol that extends for several more months. The conditioning work that supports it, the work we have been doing here, is part of that protocol. It would not be efficient to restart with a different trainer." Every word of that was accurate. Every word of it was also, clearly, not the only thing she was saying. "No," I said, "it would not." She nodded once, with the small decisive economy of a person who has made a determination and is now acting on it. "I will submit the extension request this evening." She stood, and then paused, looking down at me on the bench with the expression I had first seen in the equipment corridor after the assessment, the thing that was quieter than triumph. "My father will want to meet you," she said. "When he reviews the result, he will have questions about how the previous assessment should be understood. I have the full documentation. The medical notation, the evaluation report, the treatment protocol. The record is complete." "Yes," a pause. "He will also want to express gratitude formally." "That is his prerogative." I wanted to express it first. She looked at the training floor for a moment, then back at me. "Not formally." I waited. You treated a difficult situation with care and precision, she said. You looked at what was actually there. You did not accept the easy label. The amber gold eyes were direct and clear. That is what I wanted to say, not formally. I stood up from the bench. We were standing on the same level again, the same way we had stood on the first day when she had walked across the floor and I had asked her to raise her arm. The training floor was between us and the windows, the long gold light still lying across it. You did the work, I said, all of it. I identified the problem and built the framework. But every session for 6 weeks you showed up and you did the actual work. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, the only thing that actually matters. She looked at me for a moment longer. Then she said quietly, 6th hour tomorrow. She walked out of the lower practice hall. I heard her footsteps on the corridor stone, and then the sound of the annex door opening and closing, and then quiet. I stood in the lower practice hall for a while in the long afternoon light, with the empty training floor in front of me and the drainage water moving steadily outside, and thought about the word remedial, typed into a category field by someone who had never looked carefully enough at what was actually there. 6 weeks ago, it had described a person who had never been seen correctly. I had a contract extension to wait for, and in the morning, at the 6th hour, I would be here.